Okay. So welcome everyone to Meets Mieke Roscher. I'm Sofia Efstathiou, and I'll introduce this webinar. Share my screen with you. Okay. Welcome to Meets. It's our last talk for the fall semester. And here's our jingle.
More meat, less meat. Speed.
I will teach you not to bite me.
More meat, less meat.
What is actually
Mitigation.
So Mitigation is a Norwegian Research Council funded project. Our full title is Mitigation Towards Sustainable Meat Use in Norwegian Food Practices for Climate Mitigation. The jingle that you just heard is one of element of our collaboration also with artists, and it was produced by Chicks on Speed together with the participation of different members of our research team. And today we're meeting Mieke Roscher. She's going to talk to us about becoming meat historically. A little bit about the project before I introduce Mieke. As mentioned, the project is funded by the Norwegian Research Council, and it is a transdisciplinary climate research collaboration project. So transdisciplinary means we're crossing the various disciplines, so including the social sciences, the humanities, and also nutrition science and the arts. But we're also transcending the kind of academy and the academic disciplines to include actors from farming, from restaurants, food provisioning. So we have one of the biggest retailer in Norway, Menu, is one of our partners, as well as climate communication and climate culture actors. And the way this project is structured, it's structured around what we call 3 R's for sustainable meat use. And these 3 R's are recognizing the animals and the people who are involved in making meat, replacing, where possible, animal-based protein with plant-based or lower emission type protein, perhaps insect-based proteins, and then refining how we use meat to avoid malnutrition, including obesity and also waste. So waste and loss. So I'll just say a little bit about the speaker. Today's speaker is Mieke Roscher. She is an associate professor for cultural and social history and the history of human-animal relations at the University of Kassel in Germany. Her publications include Ein Königreich für Tiere, I don't know if I said that correctly, in 2009 on the British animal rights movement, the edited volume Animal Biography, together with André Kreber, published in 2018, and the Handbook of Historical Animal Studies, together again with André Kreber and Brett Misele, published in 2021. She's also written numerous articles on animal historiography and agency, the 20th century European zoo, and gender in animal welfare. And currently, Mieke is writing a monograph on the political history of animals in the Third Reich. So thank you, Mieke, for joining us today. I'm very excited to hear your presentation.
Thank you so much, Sophia. As you might hear, all of you, I have a very bad cold. I hope it's going to be okay. So I'm going to share my screen now.
Mm-hmm.
You should be seeing now.
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to start with this picture. It's a German, don't worry about that. It is from 1967, and in it, and on it, the Central Marketing Board for the German agricultural industry started running this campaign in 1967, and on it declared meat to be a vital force. In German, that is called Lebenskraft, and you see that written on the bottom of this page. And this advertisement really was to become iconic in German advertisement as such. Vital for the site was really important. And it equated meat with protein, and at the same time, he classified any plant-based food as secondary as death. On the one hand, the marketing board saw its mission in finding new outlets for an increasingly euthanized market, and on the other hand, tried to endow meat with a distinct quality label at a time when ecological debates about the environmental costs were beginning to emerge in the 1970s. To be clear, meat at this time mainly meant the dead remnants of cows and pigs. The industrialized breeding and slaughtering of chicken, at least in Central Europe, only started to develop. Back then, just as now, no German citizen would have thought of meat as a juicy bit of slaughtered dog, however. Yeah. So the question is, what can count as meat at a specific moment in time? And this question is not nearly as trivial as it first seems, and one thinks of meat as just a piece of slaughtered animal. What can be stated with more certainty, however, that in the bourgeois conception of a meal, meat has developed into the centerpiece of the menu, and that is especially true after World War II. In the German context, that was the time of the economic miracle, the Wirtschaftswunder, and everything started to develop really, really fastly, and wealth and affluence was really tied to the ability to consume meat. From the early 1960s onwards, meat became an everyday product, affordable to people across the social strata, at least in Western Europe again and in the United States. And as Amy Fitzgerald and Nick Taylor have argued, meat expanded thus to be part of a cultural hegemony and developed really into the epitome of food per se. As a result, the amount of meat consumed has tripled between the 1950s and the 1990s. Again, that is in the context of Western Europe. Nick Fitzgerald had even attributed something habitual to the consuming of meat, something that is in no need of further explanation, only in cases when it is confronted with sort of culinary anomalies, such as the rise of veganism, which we see only now really happening. Jacques Derrida, of course, whose work has been really influential for the human animal studies context more broadly, has turned this mechanism, and I hope I pronounced it right, it's such a big word, carnophallogocentrism, and it's a mechanism in which the eating of meat is vital for the individual to become a subject, or rather to become a man, because it is tied to the gendering of meat. According to this understanding, doing meat is always to be considered as doing gender also. And finally, Annie Potts has sketched out the contours of a meat culture that is characterized by specific ideas of gender, class, and taste. So according to all these scholars, the meaning of meat has evolved and changed into something that is more than food. It is perceived as an object defined in its relation to human bodies mostly. That's obviously, however, as an object that determines the beginning as well as the end of specific interspecies relationships, the relationship between humans and animals. And as such, it really does need a multidimensional approach. I'm really glad to hear that you are doing that in your project. The interdisciplinary side here is really, really important to really disentangle these multiple layers surrounding meat. Become meat, the conversion of an animal into food is, as I want to show, in what is following, a process which is historically changeable and really also contingent, but which I argue stands for a certain transformative process within modernity. And at the same time, it allows us to scrutinize the lived relationship between humans and animals. So this is what I want to talk about today. So drawing from an empirical example that I will introduce in just a minute, namely the slaughtering of dogs for meat in the late German Empire, I will try to invite these multidimensional layers. And my goal here is to use approaches both used by animal history as well as the history of knowledge to have analyzed these ambivalent negotiations concerning the living and the dead body of animals by providing this historical dimension. In short, I will try to historicize meat, and you can say after I'm successful or not. Okay, so I'm gonna start with the first part of my talk. The separation of animal and meat is an historical process that I would argue that started at the end of the 19th century with a purposeful cutting of certain parts of the animal carcasses for consumption. In contrast to pre-modern times and pre-industrialized times, where the animal was predominantly consumed in its entirety, the dismemberment was practiced in open spaces in the public, and where one could really deduct from the remnants of the dead body what form of animal that appeared in front of you. Only modernity offered the possibility of becoming meat. It allowed for different bodily transformations from the living to the dead, and these processes primarily took place on a material level. Meat was now stripped from the bones, blood, and red, and preservatives and refrigeration that came with industrialization made it easier to also store the animals. So I brought this picture here for you. This is a refrigeration ray card, and it's from roughly 1870, and was used not in Germany but in the United States. But what you can see here is that you are able to transport much more dead bodies than you would have been able to carry and transport living animals. So that change was really vital for this process of becoming meat. And at the same time, also emerged the practice of the separation of the plumage and skin from the flesh before it was sold. So before, like roughly the 1860s, what you could buy at a butcher shop was really parts where the fur or the horns or the hooves are still attached. And this changed in the second part of the 19th century. So this evolution within the livestock industry not only enabled dissociation from slaughter and selling, but also the increase in production. So this really goes hand in hand. And also what changed was, of course, the breeding of animals. Selective breeding was now enforced, and this also changed the bodies, the real bodies of animals. So when we think about animals in the past, you always have a picture of like how they look today, and this is just not the case. So the animals that we see today are a product of the 19th century. Before that, they looked really, really different. So the separation of production and consumption also had a significant spatial aspect. The explosion of the slaughter process behind the closed doors of the slaughterhouses from the 1870s onwards also affected how society looked towards meat, how they perceived meat. And Norbert Elias has famously argued that the concealment of the killing is a typical aspect of the civilizing process, and the practice of moving the slaughter and carving on animals behind the scenes of social life, as he says, was evidence of the gradual transformation of behavior and emotion. In modern civilized societies, most people, he argued, would feel an uneasiness when they or others would need to dismember whole oxen or pigs at the tail. And the industrialization of animal husbandry, therefore the process of production and consumption are separated. And this is really what the modern stands for. Concurrently, animals and meat were from now on also placed into two different categories, at least on a discursive level. So one way to scrutinize this historically is by looking at normative orders. And there seems to be a rich basis for that for historical longitude studies. For example, the German law of 1951, the law for trafficking in livestock and meat, defines livestock as cattle, pigs, and sheep, and defines meat as part of these animals as long as they are fit for human consumption. And I also brought this example. This is an EU regulation from 2004, and this regulation defines meat as the edible parts of domestic ungulates, and it defines them as bovine, porcine, ovine, and caprine species, poultry and lagomorphs, farmed reptiles and rodents, farmed and wild game. What you can see quite clearly is that butcher dogs are neither to be found in this regulation or in the other one from 1951. On the contrary, dog meat is seen as being beyond the European imagination. Instead, the finger is here always directed towards Asia, and to not eat dogs is seen as a mark of civilization and implied also as a racialized distinction. This was, however, not always the case, and this is why I now turn to my empirical example. At the turn to the 20th century, based on the source material that I found in various German archives, dog meat was meat. Yeah? After all, dogs were butchered and their meat was also sold and consumed. And I got hints of this practice of dog butchering from roughly around the 1850s. And the sources could be found in various German-speaking countries, also Austria, also in France, we had this practice, but I'm just going to say a little bit about the German case now. It's interesting that with the establishment of the German Empire in 1871, we now find also regulations about that practice. And the German Empire is really good in finding regulations for all sorts of things, so they also regulated the butchering of dogs. The Chemnitz slaughterhouse, the slaughterhouse in the eastern parts of Germany, established in 1883, for example, was equipped with a special dog butchery. Other slaughterhouses also offered the service, and I have brought to you here some examples of stands that are used for the inspection processes. And what you can see here is Herd is horse in German, so this was a horse meat. And we also have here the hound, the dog in German. So there were extra stands just for the dog meat. However, it seems that the slaughtering of dogs was a rather regional phenomenon, with over half of the killings around 1900 having been taken place in Saxony. It's like in the northwest of Germany, I couldn't find hardly any examples, so it was insignificant. The operator of the central slaughterhouse in Munich tried to keep the slaughtering of dogs away from his premises, actively tried to do that in fear of a negative press here, even though it was Munich in particular that was known as the capital of dog eaters around 1900. Complaints against those dog slaughterhouses can be found in the source material, but they were until the 1930s mostly directed at the hygienic codes of practices, the violation of slaughterhouse regulations, and also meat inspections that had been not tough enough. In other cases, people were complaining about the smell, the noises that the dog would make, but that dogs were deemed killable was a given, yeah? And only a few animal welfare activists would say otherwise at that time. And there was never a concerted campaign against outlawing the practice. And yeah, so the slaughtering of dogs was not outlawed by the animal welfare law passed by the National Socialists in 1933. There was only a mandatory inspection included in that law. Also, the reformation of the law in the 1970s went by without a ban of dog slaughtering. This only came in 1986, so pretty late in the game, and was then in accordance with European law. The European law outlawed the slaughtering of dogs in the 1980s. So until the 1980s, dogs were slaughtered and they were also eaten, albeit in very, very small numbers. Dogs meat never became a mass product and was mostly consumed in times of need, such as during the Great Depression or during the wars. And I wrote another picture here. This is the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. So you can see this here is in French because also in France, the consuming and the slaughtering of dogs is taking place. But other than cat meat, which you can see here also on the picture, is also offered. You also see rats here being sold for meat. Other than cats and rats, it was also sold in times when there was no too. So this is really different from the slaughtering of cats. But the cheap meat, just as horse meat, was also considered a cheap meat and was mainly used to copy the lifestyle and growing appetite for meat by the bourgeois class. So working class people would buy dog meat because it was cheap to copy the meat-eating behavior of the bourgeois class. It was estimated that between 1900 and 1950, around 1 million dogs were made into meat in the German Empire and then the German Reich. So this is compared to other, and it's not that much, but it is not an insignificant number either. So thus it can be said that around the turn of the century, there are multiple discourses around the killability of dogs that involve the following: hygiene and cleanliness of the animal, as well as the culture and the economic value of meat and of dogs. So we have different categories here. These were both on the material as well as on the semiotic side, and I'm gonna talk about a little bit now. This picture I wanted to show, this is again France. This is in the 1920s. You can see this is a boucherie canine and a dog slaughter place, and so it was not an uncommon thing in Central Europe. So what I want to do now is sort of try to say a little bit more how we can now frame that from a historian's point of view. And first of all, you can look at the practices, and following a praxeological approach, one could ask how meat is made into meat. And I don't mean necessarily only the practical process of killing the animal and dismembering the body, but also with regard to the cultural description that following the performing of the slaughter process. Meat is, interestingly enough, also flesh of slaughtered animals. Yeah? It's neatly following certain normative or religious rules. It is hardly that of animals that die from other causes. Then it's flesh, also in the English language. Insofar, the practice of slaughter is fundamental for the kind of meat. It is a necessity that the animal is slaughtered. This is also corroborated by the fact that the butchering of animals became a trade in which the killing itself, at least in the 19th century, was really marginalized, and only with industrialization and the mechanization of the process, this changed. So this lineality of the butcher that you can find in the 19th century, which is that they are somewhere between civilian and barbarism, it has only changed by the industrialized process. The modern slaughterhouse is therefore can be seen as the epitome of the industrial age. It's a performative ensemble. So the slaughter, processing, and eating of animals was, of course, not a modern phenomenon, and we had that before, yeah. But it was the way and means in which animals are confronted in these processes that I would term a modern thing. And this is also true for dogs. They were also not supposed to be slaughtered publicly, one of the signs of the modern age, as the letters that are found in the archives really show. And things are a bit more complicated when it comes to dogs. because they are also involved in other practices at the same time. They're not only slaughtered and used for meat, they were also involved in things like pollinating, and this is hype of going out with their dog that started around 1800. They are involved, of course, in hunting practices. They used for herding other livestock, and of course, they were also used in the wars. And especially the First World War sort of made a new image out of the dog as a helper in need that was not easily, where dogs as helpers are sort of highlighted also as a booster for public morale. So the question of dog eating is closely connected to the historical agency of dogs, and you must say that the agency of dogs is different to the agency of, for example, cattle or sheep, or so they're also slaughtered. So even when one accepts it as a given that animals influence human bodies, that is not automatically true also for dead animals. So I would argue that it depends on what meat you're talking about, whether this meat also has agency or not. And when it comes talking about dogs, I would say yes, they have agency, and they had agency around 1900, and that is why also their meat has some sort of agency. In terms of an animal history approach, one can conclude that we see glimpses of material resistance and interspecies communicated via this meat, not only by the living animals, but also by the dead animals. However, this agency is different from that of the living animals or those who have been used as trophies or taxidermized from museum collection because of its fleeting existence. Meat is consumed and then it is gone. And this is obviously a problem for a historian because he can't talk about it any longer because it has been consumed already. So maybe an animal history approach might not have us here. So I'm turning to another field of expertise now, which is the history of knowledge. Because closely connected to the considering of meat as a material semiotic system is the analysis of the social production and circulation of knowledge of meat. With this perspective is shown that shared by cultural studies and foundations of knowledge, and that focuses on the socially and culturally dominant forces behind the production of knowledge. On meat, just as on animals, there already exists and existed around 1900 a rich store of knowledge within society. Researching what has been archived as knowledge on meat, therefore serves as an addendum to answer the question what meat means, as it goes beyond the perspective that religious entities as agents in their own right. One could, for example, ask what processes had led to the endowing of meat with specific attributes that were in turn tied to specific knowledge systems, such as the system of health and disease, nutrition and consumption, but also of cognitive abilities of animals and the ability to feel pain. So these, I've written down these knowledge systems that I found really interesting in looking at meat, and I want to say a little bit more about them now. So with regard to the first one, nutrition and consumption, this lends offers the opportunity to sketch out how since the 19th century proteins and fat progressed to become the main part of the human diet. This is a modern phenomenon also. So nutrition is also not always the same nutrition. Until the discovery of vitamins, which was in the 1930s, I believe, the quality of food was always characterized and was always characterized by how much energy it produced, and meat was the energy that was at the center of this debate. To meat, as Dr. Barnes has argued, seen under this perspective as a synonym for physical strength. Furthermore, it is to be recognized that the refrigeration of meat as a technical advance, and I've already said a little bit about this, with separate animals from the meat, and this is a picture that I found really interesting also, and it shows how it is integrated in these debates about health, and is declared the healthiest product there is. Yeah. And what is also interesting is that we see this making of meat as tied to the physical strength of the human body. This also changed the perspective on the role of the animals. There was, however, also another relation of the animal around 1900 that, of course, came with Darwin's evolutionary theory, the establishment of the biological sciences, and so on. What you now see is that we have a concentration on individual animals rather than on species. The individual becomes the focus point for most of the laboratory work that we find around 1900. So this individualization also comes the meaning-making processes of animals. We see different perspectives here. The development of the now systemized form of breeding animals is also relevant for a growing market of pets. The pet animal was also a product of the 19th century, at least when it comes to large scale, including of the pets in the bourgeois family. We did have pet dogs before that, I know, but it's on the mass scale. This is only happening in the second half of the 19th century. And the breeding of those animals to certain standards, purebred became a vocabulary that was used. This is also happening, and it has the dog especially at the center of attention. So only in the 19th century we can really distinguish between certain dog breeds. So also conditional to the species was in how far meat was seen as a former instance of the animal that existed before the animal. Dogs, as the discussion fueled by animal welfare activists at the turn of the century showed, were considered an animal before they became meat, and didn't lose their dogginess after they are slaughtered also. And this is really important. And I think we might need to talk or can discuss this point later on in sort of what happens after we have meat. Do we have an animal that stands behind the idea of meat, or does that change? And I would argue that this was in stark contrast to the pigs and the cattle that are also slaughtered in those newly modernized slaughterhouses. So, okay, so seen from a history of knowledge perspective, it's also interesting to know that the mechanization of the killing process came at the same time when people were thinking about the cognitive ability of animals, the newly founded fields of animal psychology and comparative psychology respectively denounce ideas of the animal as a machine. This animal as a machine idea was obviously prominently put forward by Descartes in the 17th century, and all the resectionists of the 19th century made use of this idea in order to justify their using of the animal. And around 1900, with behaviorism, with Pavlov, and so on, you now have a move towards the cognitive abilities of animals at the same time as they begin being slaughtered in their masses. But it's interesting to know we have here a picture of Pavlov and his experiences with dogs, that new scales of human likeness were established, and that barred certain animals from being perceived as meat. Yeah? So it's really a time when we have so many different discourses clashing, because at one hand they were slaughtered and eaten, and at the same time they are seen as smart and as being able of cognitive processes and so forth. So I would argue that this transformation gave aid to new taxonomies, really, that would not necessarily establish new species, but draw new lines along the boundaries of edible and non-edible. So I now come to my last part, and I turn, does meat exist? So in a widely received article published in 2010, historian Susan Pearson and anthropologist Mary Dreifandl asked whether the animal existed, and they asked that question somewhat historically, but wanted to show how by concentrating on the symbolic area of the animals, the animals are permanently obscured by anthropocentric meaning making. Thus, their materialities and social interactions are permanently ignored. But the reason is that if you only look at animals as representing discourses on human society, as animal history did until that time, you really ignore the real animals that lie behind that history. They therefore propose a dialectical approach that looks at the lived experiences and interactions between human and animals and conflates it with their symbolic charging. And I would say that this dialectic approach is also useful when it comes to meat, because of how its construction is dependent on the meaning attributed to it. Taking these steps would show that meat itself is a product of modernity and only came into being with the separation of production and consumption. What I mean, like clearly need as further modernity is a diversification of the inter and indefinite lump of flesh that is indefinable because it has out of its fur and feathers and hooves and claws and so on. New categories of knowledge were developed. So you have at the same time separation that you also have something new coming out. This development was, however, far from smooth, and it's from historian that's always interesting to look at sort of the cracks in this development. And this is something that a combination of an history and history of knowledge could do. So Dawes, one could argue, has left the liminal status occurred to them in the 19th century, where they were eaten and used for different purposes. In the middle of the 20th century, so by 1950, I'd say doctor, then, and we do have this slaughtering happening, but they are firmly placed in the category of pets, and they are no longer seen as killable, at least in Europe. This is also true for other animals that were sort of part of this agricultural working unit, particularly horses. Horses are also not longer used as mass scale for providing meat. One reason for that is, however, that they just didn't make for good in intensive farming. So you couldn't produce dogs and horses on a mass scale and make profit out of it. And the same is true for goats and rabbits, by the way. So they also did not end up in mass industrial slaughter regimes because their bodies just don't work on that same scale. So you can't treat them as easy as you can with pigs and so forth. Additionally, other than the other animals that became part of the bourgeois family narrative and also side progression and civility, therefore, what was increasingly consumed here was not proteins, but emotional attachment and commitment. So dogs did have a use, but it was a different one. And the separation of consumption and production was not as easily executed when it came to man's best friend. The eating of dog meat was more and more marked as uncivilized, even as a quasi-cannibalistic act. Their inclusion into the family brought them closer to the human owner. They are treated as human-like. So, to wrap it up, the question of whether meat exists is therefore always dependent on the animal it once was and can only be answered with regard to the significance of that animal in specific historical and geographical context. Dog meat was, from a specific point of time, no longer tied to the single act of consuming proteins, but embedded in other meaning-making matters. An annual history of meat, this means to uncover specific relations, practices, enmity, circumstances that impress on particular human animal relationships, and to align them with the history of knowledge of the product. Taking this approach, one may come to the conclusion that dog meat did exist, but that it was a product of the age before industrialized slaughtering. In this respect, meat does exist. To answer the question, yes, meat does exist. that it is a category in need of historical context, and any generalized notion should therefore be closely scrutinized. And with that, I end, and I thank you for your attention. I'm really looking forward to the discussion and your thoughts of whether meat is a historical category or not. Okay, and I'm gonna stop my presentation now. Okay.
Thank you so much, Mieke. I'm gonna propose we have a little break now for 10 minutes, and then we convene at 3:32, or a bit after past, to continue the discussion. Thank you so much again, Mieke. And everyone, I will invite you also to join us as panelists if you like after the break. Thanks so much. See you in 10 minutes. Welcome back to our webinar with Mieke Roscher. Thanks again for this super engaging talk, Mieke. I already see we have a question in the Q&A box, and I would like to invite Mina also to join us as a panelist and ask the question herself live. I'm not sure, Mina, if you want to talk.
This is such a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I have proposed that Mina ask her question herself, but I think maybe she's not available, so I can read the question for everyone.
Yeah.
Currently, cultivated meat, as well as the new generation plant-based meat replacements, are often being portrayed as meat. What's your view on this development? Could the meaning of meat, emotionally and otherwise, indeed be extended from the conventional animal-based meat to these new meats in a way that will or can persist in society for some time at least? For example, in order to facilitate a transformation away from eating conventional animal-based industrial meat? So yes, I think we will answer this question.
Okay, I'm gonna try to answer this. It's a big question, right?
Yeah.
And when I wrote this talk, this paper, I was thinking about cultured meat, because I would say this is the end of meat, really, as a product of modernity, because cultured meat, we are really in postmodern times with cultured meat. So if you say meat is a product of modernity, then I would say cultured meat cannot be portrayed as meat. But of course, you're right if you say meat is used as sort of a meaning-making figure. And I said a little bit about that. That is Donna Haraway's vocabulary here. How are things made into meaning-making figures? Then you could say, yes, of course, cultivated meat is sort of an extension in the techno-scientific age of meat. So, and we do have this thinking about making a replacement of an animal that once was and no longer existed in this discourse. Then yes, then cultured meat becomes meat in a techno-scientific discourse. But that is really the postmodern idea then. So, and the second part is, if I think this is sort of something that you should inspire to do, right? And I'm not sure about that. But I find it totally interesting, because the same can be said about milk, right? And this whole, I don't know if you know this whole debate about the naming of milk, like in the German context. Producers of plant-based milk, like soy milk or coconut milk, and so they are not allowed to print milk on the carton. They have to use the word drink because of the milk industry's insistence that only cow milk or sheep milk or animal milk is milk. So in order to sort of subvert this notion, I would say, yes, we should call it meat, right? Because it really points at the fact that things need to change. And the resistance by other corporations indicate that something is going on here, right? But I do think that these are different questions to ask. So as a student, I would say, no, it's not neat because it's a postmodern phenomenon. As an actress, I would say, yes, please try to say it's neat because you need to sort of cultivate a different sort of vocabulary here. Mm.
Thank you. This was a great question, and yeah, I will follow up on your answer, Mieke, but directly. I'm gonna email you something now. Been working on meat replacement as drag, so thinking about sort of yeah, this kind of what you call the postmodern existence of meat. Do we have another question from our audience? Or shall I do the next question? I think I can ask my question. Yeah, I was very much interested in your analysis of like sort of how dog meat ceased to exist as meat historically, and thinking about what you discussed as sort of the emotion and emotional attachment replacing the function of the meat as nutrition, I guess, and the animal as food, and also this kind of knowledge practices, and I thought your account of that change was very interesting. So I was wondering, well, and maybe this connects also to Mina's question, and I was like, how could we move away from animal-based meat production? So maybe one other kind of conclusion or lesson could be that one could develop these other kinds of relationships with food animals or farm animals that are now seen as meat. So I was thinking about sort of, for example, how pigs have started to become adopted as pets. And what was the name of this movie, if you remember, with oh, it was such a famous movie. Babe. Exactly. Babe. And so, and thinking of this kind of also this phenomenon of YouTube and these animal videos, and how we perhaps as a society are starting or increasingly more at the same time as there is an increase of vegetarianism or veganism, and the urge to move away from this type of understanding of animals as meat because of environmental reasons and ethical reasons, at the same time sort of seeing these animals as agents and as performing these other functions of providing emotional sort of gratification or joy or other functions in our society. So I was curious about that, and whether you've been thinking about that and what you think about it.
Also a huge question. I'm going to try to answer that in 2 steps. So, and I wrote my PhD on the history of the animal welfare movement. I sort of covered the whole period from 1800 to 1990, roughly. And in my conclusion, I I finished my PhD in 2008, right, 2007. And in my conclusion, I wrote that, all the arguments are on the table, everything has been said about, and it's being can feel pain and so forth. There are teachers in their own right and so on. And there is a percentage in the society who's willing to talk about that, and another is just not interested. And so I predicted somewhat prematurely, I now know that nothing is going to change. And I was really surprised by the rights of veganism taking off in like 2015, 16 or so. That and we must conclude that it's also because all those big firms know how to make money out of it. So capitalism worked also here, right? And I don't know about Norway, but like in Germany, all the big meat producing companies now also have like a vegan line to sell. So it's an interesting development, right? There is something happening, undoubtedly. People are, as you said, rightly said, having their thoughts about, climate change and so on, and something is happening. So we're in a situation where society sort of is in the process of adapting to that, and it does that in multiple ways, either by taking up capitalism as it was and just, say, okay, now you have here your vegan steak instead of your, or by sort of finding new ways. So this is like the first answer to your question. At the same time, I think emotions are a funny thing, and studying emotions historically is really, really difficult. It's a difficult task because we can't assume that people in the past felt the same way as we do now, right? Even if you have like romantic age, like from 1800 to the 1830s, with all these ideas about love and romance and so on, it's still not the same as we feel now. And to say, emotions are the way forward, it's difficult. Because if I read, for example, the works of Percy Shelley, one of the great authors of romantic age, an early vegetarian, and try to translate that into modern times. I probably fall short of giving credit to the time he was in, if that makes any sense to you.
Yes, thanks, Mieke. Interesting, this question of, but I guess it's maybe also even a broader question, philosophical question of like, yeah, emotion and intersubjectivity and like how to study emotion, I guess, as well. But maybe we have other questions from our speakers. I see a couple of questions in the Q&A. Oh, Kate is has a question, and I will also invite her to join us as a panelist. Wonderful. And Kate, you can ask your question. Feel free also to turn on your video.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Mieke. That was so fascinating. Especially, and this recent question and discussion about emotion is really interesting to me too. I actually have two questions, and one is just really a superficial one as to whether or not you found differences between rural attitudes towards dogs and urban because of their many, many roles, but also as a tag question, I watched your presentation. I kept thinking about, I used to work in a cemetery. And what was really interesting is where I live, it's illegal. It's not legal to bury an animal in a human cemetery for whatever reason. But there were in the records historically, it was clear that there had been some private arrangements when wealthy people who had had a companion animal really wanted to be buried with it. And this was done sort of secretly. And so all of these very individual emotions, as well as the trending emotional movements towards animals as meat or in other companion roles, I'm really curious as to what you might have found as well when these rubbed up against each other in contradictory ways.
Thank you, Kate. Those are great questions. I tried to answer them. So there was a clear divide between rural and urban attitudes towards dog meat. They are not eaten in the rural space. That was an urban phenomenon. And it was a phenomenon, as I said, the working class tried to copy that style of the bourgeois, and they were confronted by that attitude only in the cities, right? So in rural areas, dogs are working dogs and working dogs only. They had their and they were cared for, yeah, but they had their distinct role to play. So you don't have dog eating in rural areas, even in those places where there was a lot of dog eating taking place, like in Saxony. In Saxony, we found that in Dresden, we find that in Leipzig and in Chemnitz, so not sort of in the rural areas around that. So that was a clear urban phenomenon. And so that the same can be said about the cemeteries, by the way, because the first pet cemetery was founded in 1882, I think, in Paris, and then the second one was in London, and then they sort of spread. But only the rich, of course, would be able to bury their cemetery because it costs a lot of money, right? So the sort of you had to afford to be kind to your animals and sort of give them an afterlife. And I've talked a lot about this bourgeois family narrative that developed at that time, and that always included the caring for the animal after its death. And this is interesting because it's such a Protestant notion, and you see the first century coming up in Paris is rather funny. I would say that happened in like London or Amsterdam or maybe Hamburg or places like that, but it happened in Paris, Catholic Paris. So there was a lot of uneasiness about that. So religion does play a role in how these things are, how emotionally we're allowed to be to your animals. And Protestantism was really keen on, caring for your neighbors and so on, in order to have an afterlife that is really good to you. And yeah, so we do have this discussion. It's really essential to this bourgeois idea.
Thank you so much.
Sylvia, thank you for joining us. Yeah, I think Sylvia maybe has a question.
Yes, I do. But first of all, I want to thank you for a very interesting presentation. It was very fascinating to see all this context of, in some point when you were talking about the making meat storable. And I have two comments. In that one, making meat storable, I kind of perceive it in a way that is almost like putting almost the idea of immortality, the animal. So the animal itself could to be extended to other level of existence and actually preserve. So a manipulation of, let's say, limits of this materiality and these interactions with animals. But one other comment that I wanted to say is in this banner that you show us with the canine butchery, and there were like the two animals pictures. I mean, the faces of these animals, it was so interesting to see, like, they have a, okay, I saw it, such a cutie animal, right? And it's so interesting how these emotions and how this, and context, as you were saying, has changed so much, because now, as Sophia was saying, we see YouTube videos with the animal faces to calm down, as to kind of to even feel more like warm and more like less angry, right? Like as this softness. So like animals became this, particularly the dogs, right, became even like very much the sweetness, the softness. But on that banner was actually a kind of advertisement to something. Here you find meat with these pictures. So I found it very interesting how in such a short time has changed our interaction with even with the face of the animals. Is exactly the same face. It was not more or less, is an animal that we could, is a picture of a dog that we could see and adopt. Like instead of a banner like saying butchery canine, it was like adopt animals, these dogs, you know. So yeah, it's nothing. I'm sorry, I don't have so much to contribute. It's just these two things that I found it very fascinating. This making meat storable and these emotions on the picture. And again, really great talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Celia. I'd like to add something to that, because this idea that the animals are healthy to be slaughtered, right? This is an idea that you find in all the butcher shops until the 2000s, early 2010. You had that on transport, you know, on lorries that would transfer the animal to the slaughterhouse. They had these pictures of healthy animals. It should calm you down because they die a heavy death, right? And this has really changed. So your observation here really is true, because it's true. You don't find that anymore, because our idea of a healthy animal has changed through YouTube and through, you know, different conversations that are being had about that. So we don't find butcher shows any longer that has a healthy pig image. It's just a common theme. I don't know, but in Germany at least they had that on every butcher shop. The healthy animal, healthy to be slaughtered, and that's no longer the case.
And what do you think about this idea of immortality?
Yes, no,
I don't know if it makes any sense.
No, it does, because but you have also at the same time, like from the 1850s onwards, you have the development of the modern zoo. So fields are direct from Africa, South America, and other places to the metropole, so from the colony to the metropole, especially England and so forth. And that you have the development of modern taxidermy, right? So all the natural history museums are also founded at the end of the 19th century, right? They are presenting this idea of immortality. And we do have species that did not longer exist, also displayed, you know, the dinosaurs, the mammoths, and so forth. So this idea of preserving is something that comes up because it's not only possible to do that. Because let's be honest, and before that, the taxidermy animals in those collections, they looked anything but the animal, right? And they're like crude, really crude examples of, okay, this could be maybe a tiger or an elephant, it could be something different. But the end of the 19th century only brought this technique, right, to make things durable. So yeah, and there we find this idea of immortality. The meat, I don't know, and for me as a historian, it's difficult because it's gone. Yes, I can say a lot about those trophies and, you know, the natural history collections and so forth.
Yes, just to add something, when we talk about also the definition of meat, does meat exist, right? And even the concept of meat, it has been so much under, let's say, the discipline of medicine and in the hard science, like in nutrition, for instance, is very much defined at what you can say call meat and not can you not call meat. And so it became like the main or the narrative is being very very much dominated by this more medical nutritional science, which makes, of course, even challenging for people that are not, for the common citizen to be involved in these discussions, how to include in the discussions the meanings, the values of meat beyond the understanding of what is defined by medicine or nutrition. To actually to open, as you were saying, like when you were giving example of the dogs as an agency, you are actually opening, right? Like beyond what is meat in this more strict way. So this is not a question, this is just something that
I just want to connect to that, Sylvia, because we also
yeah.
have a question from Mina, Mina, feel free to ask it yourself, by the way, if you want. But Mina is asking about current meat-eating cultures in Asia. And whether you think, I don't know if you know, or whether the characteristics would be similar to Europe, that, we have a difference between urban and rural areas, and sort of different attitudes to eating the animals. So, and this connects in that sense to Sylvia's question.
So I really don't know. I don't know about how in Asia things are. And after COVID, I also studied all these developments on those wet markets, and how animals are sold and made into meat there, because there's a really interesting narrative going on there. What I find absolutely fascinating is that we are actually here on a linguistic level, right? And the English language does provide us with two words, flesh and meat, right? And to say the one is that and the one is the other is something that is said with purpose, right? Like in German, we only have Fleisch. There's only one word for it. So it's really interesting to look at how and when this changed linguistically, right? And for English, you can say that after the Norman conquest of 1066, you have these words that are from the Anglo-Saxon language, like pork and cattle and so on. No. We have cattle and pig. And then there's the Norman language, the language of the French rulers. We use different words like pork and beef and mutton and so on. So it is a question of the development of a language, and that is our expertise as historians, philosophers, and now the natural sciences can say, no, you have to say this is called meat and this isn't, and I'm baffled by that. And that is really our expertise, that you can say how things have developed and so on. So this is my comment on that. And I find that also really interesting in the matter of gender, where no, you have to say men and women, and it only exists in these two categories, and we say just a moment, right? I know that this has developed over time, so there's a history to it. And yeah, so it always amazes me how the natural sciences are so sure to say things that are really in our field of expertise.
Thank you, Mieke. I think this is a good point to end the session affirming the dominance, no, or not dominance, but like at least some expertise in the humanities once it comes to our conceptual histories and understanding. And thank you so much again for this talk, so rich. And yes, our talk is recorded and it will also be available on YouTube. And I will share screen again and yes. Oh, I forgot to do this before, which was if you want to tweet about this, to use our hashtags and or share it on social media. You can also follow us on Mitigation at Twitter and Facebook. And yes, I wanted to say thank you and see you next year. I'm happy also to hear from you. If you want to give a talk in this series, please email me, and I will play our song again and invite you to follow what's happening on the webinar, because we already have some confirmed speakers, and so we're gonna have
More meat, less meat. Speak.
I will teach you not to bite me.
More meat, less meat.
What is actually
Mitigation.
Thank you again. Bye-bye, everyone, and have a good vacation, winter holiday.